in an advanced spacecraft that was traveling at speeds that the U.S. Air Force supposedly wouldn't reach with the Aurora project for 10 or 15 or 20 years after that time.
What did that spacecraft look like?
Well, I mentioned how it was sort of teardrop shaped and it was silver and it was sort of hovering like a, is it a Nissan Z car? I mean,
okay, that's right. That's right. I remember
now. It was basically this aerodynamic,
I remember. That's okay.
looking craft that was by the loading dock there.
You don't need to repeat.
My point there is that we know from everything that occurred during that brief encounter with the three Martians at Curtis Wright that as of 1970, they were clearly more advanced than us. We also have the softer, more fuzzy logic data from the remote viewing that a very gifted team of remote viewers under Dr. Courtney Brown at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, performed, and he's described in several of his books about remote viewing and the Mars connection to the remote viewing program. And he has stated that the civilization under Mars is 150 years more advanced than ours. I don't know if that's the case, but certainly in 1970 they were flying something that was beyond what the U.S. space program had achieved. And so would such a civilization be capable of cross-speciating hybrid animals via genetic engineering? I would say yes, because we know that our own civilization has now started doing that, unfortunately. So yes, I think the hybridization of creatures on the surface perhaps has resulted from experiments that have been undertaken by the indigenous Mars civilization. But we also have the possibility that they are remnant species from the time prior to the solar system catastrophe of 9500 BC, when the so-called Atlantean civilization on Earth was sending people and potentially some of their own projects up there, or even carrying out cross-speciation on Mars. If they were an advanced civilization, as advanced as we think they are, namely capable of space launches from Baalbek, and using, for example, the Great Pyramid, because we had a colony there, they might have even engaged in genetic engineering on Mars because it was a quarantine site where they could sequester those experiments from Earth. So I think it might be all of the above, but I certainly wouldn't discount the possibility that the indigenous Martian civilization may have brought about those species through genetic engineering.
Or if they are doing the genetic engineering on Mars, like now, in the present.
Yeah, I mean, such species could have emerged naturally. We don't know why they would not have. Clearly, if there was the cataclysm that we believe happened, there might have been enough disruption of the genome of the Martian animals to cause rapid mutations that then would have been adaptive for some reason. So the hybrid species up there may be a result of the catastrophe or of other events that have affected Mars in prehistory.
That wasn't my question, though, but that's okay. I was just wondering if they are still genetically engineering animal humans.
I have no evidence they are. I'm just saying that the species up there that are hybrids could have been hybrids that resulted from genetic engineering on Earth, either in this civilization or the previous one, the Atlantean one, that we know had colonized Mars, or at least had several bases up there, because I found one of those bases there on the home plate plateau. Notice that NASA called it the home plate plateau. It's kind of curious.
Yeah, very curious.
Yes, and yet we know that there's other data establishing that the human civilization on Mars is 150 years more advanced than us. So these hybrid species could be recent experiments, or several hundred years or what have you, or even more recent from the Martian civilization. We just don't know. All we know is that they diverge from life on Earth because they're hybrids of existing Earth species, but they also are similar, similar to life forms on Earth because they possess the traits of living Earth species. So there's something of a mystery of why there would be hybrid life forms on Mars. Another statement that has been made is maybe they're animals that have been released from the genetic engineering experiments that people have alleged they've seen taking place at deep underground military bases, like the one that is under the Archuleta Mesa near Dulce, New Mexico. That's another possibility, is that they're just releases of hybrid creatures that have been created by our own military-industrial complex.
Yes.
Maybe to fend off the plesiosaurs from human colonists or whatever. Who knows? But they exist because we have photographs of them, and unless somebody can establish that NASA faked evidence of life forms on Mars, notwithstanding its its policy of cohering and abiding by the decree established by the CIA's Robertson Panel report of 1953 that all evidence of extraterrestrial life should be debunked and those claiming extraterrestrial contact should be subjected to smear campaigns. Right now we have to take NASA's data for what it seems to contain, which is evidence of life. If we later find that there was some kind of conspiracy or hoax with inside NASA to hoax life forms, I guess this data could possibly have been hoaxed, but some of it is so subtle. For example, I'm looking at right now at the 3 images of plesiosaurs that I isolated that I include in our PowerPoint for our public lectures that Mars is doing, and except for putting statues up there or basically models of life forms, I don't see how they would have faked this data. Like, one of the plesiosaurs is jumping out of an earthen embankment, and the shadows beneath him are all consistent with the sun, with position of the sun and everything. And the subtlety of these photographs would have required human beings up on Mars to put the models in place, and that itself becomes a proof of the fact that Mars is inhabited. So I think NASA's caught in its own lies here. I don't think it can lie the implications of this particular photograph away. It contains evidence of life forms.
You also said that there are some people on Mars that you met who are absolutely crazy.
Well, there was one U.S. personnel who had apparently been there for months and was in a state of extreme psychological agitation because he was a pioneer in a forbidding environment. But he was, I wouldn't say he was crazy. He was somebody who had undergone an exposure event. He was sort of agitated and speaking very quickly, just as if people might if they had been out in the elements for a number of weeks and had suddenly been rescued. You know, you encounter people who have experienced exposure. Sometimes if they're still ambulatory, they're in a state of adrenal exhaustion because their will to live has been summoned over many weeks. He was kind of in that condition. He was ruddy complected from being out in the sun. His hair was greasy. His face had a stubbly beard, like a week or 2 weeks of beard growth, but not a full beard. His clothes were kind of sticking to his body like somebody would be if they were perspiring a lot. He was kind of stinky. You know, he was somebody who needed a bath. And he was just very, very agitated because he had lost some of his fellow colonists to predators on the surface of Mars.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
This one, I'm not sure. Like, I know that you may not have the answers to all these, but I'd rather pick your brain and find out just in case.
Yeah.
Do you think some of the people could have made it to Mars via the Bermuda Triangle?
I think that there may be, that's an interesting question in the sense that I've been speculating that since we believe there are natural wormhole locations where natural factors may create a teleportation effect, I was thinking along this lines of the possibility that maybe some of the lake monsters that have been seen at Loch Ness in Scotland and Lake Champlain in New Hampshire and Lake Okanagan up in British Columbia are the result maybe of plesiosaurs from Mars who have accidentally wormholed to Earth. For example,
interesting.
My photographs of plesiosaurs look very similar to the picture of Champ that Susan Mancy took. Although Champ has a darker complexion in the famous Susan Mancy photograph of Champ. But the articulation of the body and the neck, the contours of the neck, the size of the neck relative to the rest of the body is very, very similar to that photograph of the Lake Champlain monster. Okay. I think it's much more speculative as to whether that possible natural teleport effect occurred at the Bermuda Triangle so that humans have simply jumped to Mars accidentally as a result of getting caught in some kind of quantum vortex in the Bermuda Triangle. I think that would possibly be fanciful, although since it's an area of high geomagnetic disturbance, I don't think we can eliminate the possibility that people have